Irenaeus claimed when he was young, he listened to Polycarp teach in Smyrna of Asia Minor. Polycarp had listened to the Apostle John teach when Polycarp himself was young. This means that Irenaeus got to hear reliable accounts of Jesus' life and teaching from eyewitnesses. Although the detail of Irenaeus' birth are unknown, it's plausible that Irenaeus was a native of Smyrna and was born sometime in the AD 130s or even 140s. After a brief time of studying in Rome, Irenaeus headed across the Alps to Lugdunum of Gaul, now known as Lyon, France. Lyon has always been an important center of trade in the region of southeastern France.
Oftentimes when Christians mention the apostolic succession, what they are talking about is the exact thing that this creator mentions here. The fact that from the Apostle John, John taught Polycarp. Polycarp then taught Irenaeus. And so the writings of Polycarp are valid because he learned directly from one of the apostles. The writings of Irenaeus then become valid because he was learning directly from Polycarp. And when you look at Polycarp's epistles to the Philippians, it seems to be very much in line with the Johannine epistles. So especially when they talk about the Antichrist and when they talk about the love for truth and things of that nature, descriptions of Jesus, they seem to fall in line. And since Polycarp was born and was a young adult, he was born in 69 CE, and John is supposedly not dying until 100 CE. And since John was near to him, he was in Ephesus, whereas Polycarp was in Smyrna. These are not too much difference apart from each other. The apostolic succession seems to be valid. So then that would make the church fathers more accurate to what the apostles taught. Now, the question then begs, do we have proof of any of these things? So when we read the epistles of the Philippians from Polycarp, one of the things that we will notice in it is that at no point in time does Polycarp ever claim that he was learning from John the Apostle. Now, some scholars may suggest that he was learning from John the Elder, but the church tradition is that he was learning from John the Apostle. Polycarp himself never makes this declaration. The church may counter and say that the reason why he doesn't make this declaration is because the people that he was teaching in Smyrna would have known that he was gaining this information from John, since John was in Ephesians. You can make that leap if you so choose. But without him directly saying that he learned from John, then Irenaeus coming back later and saying that he learned from John is just Irenaeus making a statement without any proof or validation. Now, why would Irenaeus do this? Well, if we look at the writings of Irenaeus, Irenaeus was primarily focused on the heresies. And the reason why he was focused on these heresies was because he was at religious war with the Gnostics. So in his work against the heresies, it is primarily a letter that was written to Florinius. And this was so that the Gnostic movement that was flourishing in his area in the 2nd century, he wanted to shut that Gnostic movement down. And in order to shut that Gnostic movement down, he needed to appear to have authority. And one of the ways, and one of the primary ways in that time frame to have authority, is if you can draw a direct line from yourself to the source. That the Gnostics are claiming they gain source from Jesus. So then if you are saying that you gain your knowledge from John, who is an apostle of Jesus, now you have access to that source. And since your thought process goes from John, or from Jesus to John, from John to Polycarp, from Polycarp to yourself, then your authority is greater than the authority of the other person. Let me give you an example. The fact that I was born in 1971 in Atlanta, Georgia. As a young man, it would have been plausible for me to have learned at the feet of Jesse Jackson. If I sat at the feet of Jesse Jackson, and from Jesse Jackson, I hear the stories and I understand the mentality, and I hear the stories and the mentality of Martin Luther King, then with me saying that where Dr. King was this type of man, Dr. King lived his life this way or that way, since he was a man that lived in Atlanta as well. So if I say that I, who could not have known Dr. King, because I wasn't born to 1971 and he had already been assassinated by that time frame. But if I sat at the feet of Jesse Jackson, and then that will give me the authority to make statements about Dr. King's life because I have the succession of people who were close to him. And then if anybody comes after me and they are repeating similarity or the same thing, then yes, they have that as well. Now, let's say there is someone who else who was born in 1971 and they are writing about Dr. King and his personality. Well, if they don't have a direct line of someone who was an eyewitness to him, then I would be granted more credibility because I'm dealing with someone who is claimed to be an eyewitness. That is the political reason, the religious reason that Irenaeus would take on this account that Polycarp learned directly from John without any proof, just the possibility of a happenstance of meeting one another during the time frame that Polycarp would have been a young man, because remember, you only have a 31 year window before John dies. So by the age of, say, 15 to 20, Polycarp would have needed to have met John and studied under John and would have only had about 15 to 20 years to do so. So you have to question, is that possible? Did that happen? Did he go and spend that time? There's absolutely no evidence based on Polycarp's own writings that he did that. Polycarp most likely learned about what was being taught in Ephesus, and that became the basis of his teachings in Smyrna. There's more likely not an apostolic succession. But since Irenaeus wrote this, then of course the 3rd century writer of Tertullian, he writes the same thing of this apostolic succession. And then in the 4th century, we have Eusebius and Jerome writing the same thing. And we know that in the 4th century, that is when Christianity became supported by the Roman government and gained its power and the creation of the Roman Catholic Church, which then ruled over all of Christianity with an iron fist. And so therefore, apostolic succession was placed into the tradition as proof. But in order to prove any of it, the first thing you have to prove is that John existed in the first place, that there was a John. And the apostolic succession of people making their claims is not proof of John. What would be proof of John is actually proof of John. Pottery, writings, something of that nature. Let me put this bug in your ear. It is not until Irenaeus, not Polycarp, that the Gospels are given the name Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So whether or not Polycarp studied under John then becomes into question because there was no such Gospels named John. This is something that Irenaeus did in and around 180, 182. And understand he is doing this when Polycarp is a very old man, or he had already passed on. No, Polycarp died in around 155, 165, one of those time frames. So Polycarp is dead. So it cannot be challenged. And Irenaeus, as the video said, is writing out of France, also in a place, but it wouldn't be challenged because he's not writing this in Ephesus or Smyrna or any other place like that. So the question is this all just church tradition in order to maintain power and to gain power, to create some type of authority that isn't really a true authority because there is no proof of John, and these are just names that were added to scrolls that were already written by anonymous authors. But this is what people bet their lives on. This is what people determine how they're going to live their life and squander the overwhelming majority of it. So you want to become free of that. You want to live your life how you see fit. And always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.